Hello, everyone. It's very nice to see you on this lecture with Amy Odene. It's about asking for too much or not enough. And Amy is a stakeholder engagement lead in Animal Ask. She is co-founder and has been in this position since September 2020. Previously, Amy worked in the animal advocacy space as both campaigns manager for ProVeg UK and global corporate relations at the Humane League UK. So I'm very glad that Amy could join us, and you will hear her lecture right now. Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for attending my talk today at the CARE conference. Delighted to be speaking. And I'm going to be talking today about asks and whether we're asking for too much or potentially not enough. So my name's Amy Odene, and I am Strategic Partnerships Lead, and I co-founded Animal Ask with George Bridgewater in September last year, and that was through the Charity Entrepreneurship Incubation Programme. And I'm going to talk to you today about our research organisation and our research process in the context of our most recent case studies, one with Synergia Animal and with Advocates for Animals, and also the services we're able to offer to your organisation in terms of ask prioritisation. So we were founded with the express aim to optimise and prioritise future asks to assist animal advocacy organisations in their efforts to reduce farmed animal suffering. So we provide organisations with in-depth research, really narrowly targeted at key decisions between different animal asks. We support organisations, individual activists, policymakers, or donors so that they all may do more good in the long term. And it's not just us who agree that this is a neglected service. So in May this year, we did a stakeholder evaluation where 84.2% of respondents strongly agreed that research to prioritise and optimise farmed animal welfare asks is neglected currently in this advocacy movement. We're really delighted recently to have been given a movement grant from animal charity evaluators from ACE, and also funding from the EA Animal Welfare Fund to support us in these efforts. So you might be thinking already, what is an ask? How do we classify what that is? So here's our definition. So this is the specific request for industry, food companies, or the government to improve the welfare of animals in their care, most of which many of you here today work within. These animal welfare asks implemented over a set period of time, and if successful, can change the lives of millions of animals. So for example, this would be asking companies to commit to going cage-free over a set period of time, or asking the government to pass legislation to stop the live transport of animals. All asks we're really familiar working within in the movement. So research is essential to making these well-informed decisions, and given this impressive increase in the interest in farmed animal advocacy over the last few years, we really think that supporting our community and prioritising the best asks is key, because not all asks the movement makes of companies or governments are equally impactful. So we know that good prioritisation has the potential to really greatly increase the effectiveness of our efforts. Charity entrepreneurship's research indicates that the difference in value between the best and worst asks already being reasonably considered could be as much as 3 times as impactful. In our research, we found that the value of different asks can vary greatly. And in some cases, asks can have 0 or potentially negative value when considering the full scope within which the ask exists. So I'd like you to have a think about how you currently decide to work on your projects as an individual or a member of an organisation. Many groups decide to work on opportunities that are purely reactive. Some are influenced by potentially specific funder requests, or perhaps leadership has a specific personal preference towards working on a particular species. And often this may not take into account the full scope of the ask that you're campaigning for. So for example, some asks on the surface might seem plausibly good, but when considered through multiple different perspectives and scrutinized through multiple research rounds, it might show a different story. So just a couple of examples here, really simply. So something like restricting or banning antibiotics, which on the surface seems really great, something we should all be campaigning for. However, it might have a negative impact on the farm if conditions don't improve alongside this ask. So potentially here, we might have a spike in disease rates, causing mortality to be higher, resulting in the ask being eliminated from our rounds due to these flow-through effects. Or potentially environmental enrichment for pigs. So another seemingly good intervention, making sure pigs have access to the necessary environmental enrichment. However, potentially the price increase associated with this could push up the price of pork and move more consumers towards a cheaper alternative, such as chicken, meaning more chickens and therefore more individuals would need to be farmed overall. So again, maybe this would be eliminated from our process. And these are all just broad and I guess somewhat fictional examples to just demonstrate the ways in which in-depth research can be crucial in ask formation. So even if we have made a decision on which campaign or which specific species we want to target, how do we decide on which welfare asks to include? And what are the specifics of the language? I'm sure if we all had our own way and it was our personal preference, the ask would be 10 pages long and cover every single welfare improvement. But of course, we have to think practically between including maybe 3 elements of welfare improvements or perhaps 10. So we want to assess, how do we know when we're asking for too much or just simply not enough? So we believe our service can really cover some ground here and provide this in-depth support to any organisation seeking to optimise their ask formation and help inform groups on what the priority elements are to include in an ask, given their importance for welfare and tractability. So this is what our research looks like in a sort of visual representation, all of the things that organisations could consider when deciding what to work on. So of course, we've got the question of which species to support, what their welfare indicators are any other organisations working in this region? Could there be a conflict of interest there, or could you partner with another organisation? We want some country scoping, so we need to know maybe there's a really niche ask in your country that is not relevant to any other country, but is really interesting and could provide a lot of impact to a species that's heavily farmed in your region. We want to know what the scientific literature says. What do experts say? Is there any policies already in place for that animal? So we want to try and collate all of this information during our research process. So when starting our organisation, the main goal was to pilot with some existing organisations in the animal advocacy space, offering our research for free to support the movement with strong ask prioritisation, while simultaneously testing this research model for ourselves and of course our research process. And we were lucky enough to partner with both Synergy Animal and Advocates for Animals. So we start by trying to get an understanding of the parameters within which the organisations are working, and if there's any specific requests or limitations to the scope of the research. So with Synergy Animal, they wanted to work on fish, and it was for 2 countries in Southeast Asia. And we knew it was going to be for a corporate or producer campaign. With Advocates for Animals, they were relatively broad in their scope, so willing to consider any species, but it was for the UK, and it was going to be a legislative campaign. So once this is all established and we've confirmed the timelines, we're able to start this research process that's very specific to the area within which the organisations are working. Both organisations also wanted to impact the largest number of animals, of course, so the research always has that in mind, that we're trying to affect the most individual lives. So in terms of our process then, so we start with country scoping to ensure we've just got a really basic understanding of the context required to complete this work. Maybe what does the public think of animal welfare overall in the region? Are there any cultural considerations we need to bear in mind? Any barriers we might face? And once we've got a good grasp of that, we move into the research rounds, with the different clusters of evidence providing us with different perspectives that we can combine to increase our confidence in the ideal ask. And these are the weighted factor model. We go through expert opinions and also do a cost effectiveness analysis. And I'm going to talk you through this process now so you can get a really good idea of the full service that we're able to offer. So we start with the weighted factor model, and we've got a lot of questions to ask ourselves and of the research at this point. So we want to highlight potential risks or crucial considerations, any barriers we might face. So we want to consider potential risks or crucial considerations for the ask, which, if true, could be sufficient actually to rule out the idea from the round. So this model changes every intervention we work within. So this is the example weighted factor model from our corporate relations project with Synergia Animal. So firstly, we want to test the strength of the idea. So out of all of the asks possible within fish for Southeast Asia, does this ask seem robustly good? And is it high valued by the animal? Are we confident the implementation of this ask would have a large effect on the animal's quality of life? So we carry out a welfare estimate for each ask. We want to know about behavioural indicators, mortality rates, what percentage of the animal's life would this ask affect, for example. And we also, of course, want to know how well evidenced it is and are the sources sufficiently robust. We then look at tractability. So we want to know about feasibility. How quickly could the farmers implement this change? Are there any bottlenecks we need to be aware of? Would they need to make significant investments? Do they need to buy any new equipment, or maybe just staff require some training to be able to carry out this change? And what about public support? Are there any existing polls? Is it easy to mobilize activists? In some interventions, like where there's a ballot initiative or you need specific public support, we weight this section much more heavily. We want to know about measurability. Can it be measured? How well can it be enforced? And then lastly, the ask complexity. So how difficult is it to communicate, both to the public, but also to the corporate relations staff, to the farmers? Does it cover different species, different life stages, which could be difficult to communicate? We then move on to counterfactual replaceability. So how likely is this ask to be implemented without our help? Are there any governments working towards this initiative? In which case, should we focus our efforts elsewhere? Or the issue might be being pushed from other groups on environmental grounds, for example. So we assess that as part of the process. And then any externalities. So could it affect the space in a negative way, or do the opposite? Could it just overall expand the moral circle of the population? So all of these areas are numerically scored, accumulating in a total score for the weighted factor model, and that's going to be added to the expert opinion and the cost effectiveness analysis. So in the expert opinion section, we look to experts in academia, animal welfare, of course. We consult the industry. We also want to hear from NGOs, maybe with expertise in campaigns or corporate relations. And we want to speak to certification bodies. Is there anything in the region that's already pulling up the welfare of that particular species? So we use experts at all stages of this research process, all 3 rounds. Initially, just to give us really rough impressions of each ask, which ask might look promising in their opinion or not so promising. They often identify pitfalls that we, as without this expert context, don't know, and also demonstrate how viable it looks within their context if they're based in the country. Again, this is summarised by a numerical score for each ask from each expert, and they're all added together. In the later rounds, we use experts to dig into the details of an ask, a really specific questions, which can only be provided by ask-specific experts, and that's just for that final round. So some questions that we might ask. So how do you think this would fare in your country context? Is there a specific similar ask that's worked in this context before? Any learnings from that we should know about? And is this the best welfare improvement for this species? You know, right at the end, is there anything we're not thinking of, making sure that we're taking all welfare considerations into account through that process? And then we move on to our cost effectiveness analysis. So sometimes called a cost benefit or cost utility analysis. And we use this to provide an estimate of the ratio between the cost of an ask relative to its impact. In our ask comparison, we're working from a producer perspective, so we want to know which asks are most cost effective. For example, between transport and antibiotic use, is one more expensive than the other from the producer perspective. We also model the ask as a whole, so we want to see what effect it would have on consumer pricing and therefore consumption, as well as how many farms or retailers this might actually affect. So how many animals could we affect per staff outreach per year? We acknowledge the challenges with CEAs and there's no perfect system, but we still feel like it's an important analysis to make alongside both the weighted factor model and the expert opinion. And here's an example just to try and draw that out. So in reality, it could look like this, where the model, we model which asks are providing the largest welfare increase alongside the price increase, and attempt to find this kind of limit of the maximum price increase before they would likely fail. So this goes back to that question of asking for too much or not enough. So here there's a small price increase for a water quality ask, larger for stocking density, again for slaughter, but then if we added something like management practices into there, maybe it just pushes it over the edge where that maximum price increase has been reached and the ask would likely fail. So this is what we're trying to model. Again, this is all just fictional for this presentation. So it's only in the combined score of all of these systems that we're able to rank the asks through this really robust method. So we pulled together scorings from each category, as you can see here, and this provides an average score for each ask. And it's by combining the score of all of these systems that we can quickly highlight the asks that look really strong or also really weak. And this is from several perspectives. And interestingly, for asks where our scoring differs, we can highlight what may have been missed or underweighted by only relying on one method of evaluation. So you can see here the top one, stocking density scored in the top 5% for all three elements, looks really promising. That would make it through to the next round. Transport scored in the top 10% for two elements, but then experts didn't like it as much, which maybe pulled it down. And antibiotic use did poorly across the board and ended up being in the lowest percentile overall, so perhaps that wouldn't make it through to the next round. So this ranking happens 3 times. So every round we do this ranking until we conclude with a final ask recommendation. So what does this look like in practice then? So we start with a huge number of asks, as many as we can think of, and we're assessing them through round 1. So we go through those 3 elements for a relatively short period of time, just to try and quickly assess as many asks as possible. Moving into round 2, so only a select few asks will make it through to this round, the ones that rank the highest. Again, moving through those 3 different sections, but this time spending more time on those, on each of those elements. Through to round 3, where we are really getting into the nitty-gritty, we're identifying those really promising high impact opportunities, and we look into these for much more time, and we create extensive reports for those. So the organisation will receive maybe 2, 3, 4 reports, and this results in that one final recommended ask. So we complete our research with one recommended intervention that we believe has the greatest overall impact. And it's an ask that you can really have confidence in, knowing how many elements of the process have been considered and assessed comparatively to all other possible interventions. So what we give to the organisation is a list of priority elements based for the welfare of the animal, given how costly they are to implement. So that's kind of the cost effectiveness analysis weighted factor model. We also want to indicate a limit of how much to ask for based on corporate relations, expert opinions, helping to inform whether we're asking for too much or perhaps not enough. We also give suggestions on what to test or trial in the region if the research is perhaps not conclusive. There might be suggestions of things they could carry out in the target country. And we also provide ongoing support from our team through our Ask consultation. So we're really proud of the pilot year that we've done and the relationships that we've held. And I think this is also really demonstrated just in these couple of quotes from the organisations that we worked alongside. Synergia said that we came to them at a good moment to step up their work in Southeast Asia, boosting their research regarding fish welfare. They believe millions of animals can benefit from the partnership, as the region is one of the biggest fish producers and consumers in the world. Advocates for Animals are incredibly grateful for the work that we carried out on their behalf. And due to the meticulous research and carefully drafted proposal, they feel confident in taking their asks forward. Full case studies of both partnerships are available on our website. So the other service alongside Ask Prioritization that we offer is Ask Consultation. So when working through the first couple of prioritization, we had requests from organizations who needed smaller levels of research to be completed, or organizations who wanted to run some ideas past us for just general support conversations. So due to this, in our stakeholder evaluation survey, we asked the wider movement if they would find this service useful, to which 68.4% stated either highly valuable or valuable. So this is a service that we also provide just for smaller pieces of research to try and support as many groups as we can within the movement. We're currently working with Synergia on this one, and also the Aquatic Life Institute, which is a new partnership. So we would be really interested if organizations could find this research resource useful, if it appealed to you or your organization. And we really want to take all of these elements that we spoke about and combine them into one optimal ask through the Ask Prioritization service. Or if you want to gain support through the consultation service, please do get in touch as we all try and continue to be as impactful for animals as possible. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to any questions.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening to this very inspiring lecture. And now it's a good time to ask Amy some questions. I have one so far, but if you have some more, then please make sure to leave them in the live question section on your inventory. So the question that has been asked is, which asks have proved to be the most cost-effective so far?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. Because we work on a kind of client-based model, if you like. So we've partnered with Synergia Animal this year, and then Advocates for Animals. We're not necessarily conducting research that is just looking right across the board, what is the most cost-effective. But within those two projects that we worked on, for fish in Southeast Asia, many of the elements of a fish ask that are generally being used by organizations came out fairly well. Things like water quality, stocking density. So these all made it through to that final round. Also some management practices, and then within the context of Advocates for Animals, so they were looking at some enforcement asks, as well as the regulatory framework for Scottish salmon farming. And so in terms of what came out well there, we had things in the final round like the beak trimming of hens, tail docking of pigs, that scored relatively highly. So I guess it depends within which context we're working, what the organizations asked us to look into. But yeah, certainly over the years, I'm sure we will be producing information and reports on generally, you know, if there's any correlation between the different projects we work on, which asks are generally coming out that look really cost effective. Sometimes some kind of niche asks creep in there, like we had a rat poison ask that made it quite far through to the end in the Advocates for Animals rounds. Something that's maybe not on everyone's agenda, but getting councils or kind of legislative bodies to stop the use of rat poison came out really well. So yeah, it's always kind of based on the organizations we're working with, but yeah, if that person who asked the question would like more specific information, then please do get in touch.
Yeah, actually we have a few more questions now.
Sure.
Please continue asking them. So the question is, what asks from plant-based campaigning would you consider most valuable from your experience?
Yeah, great question. So far with our research, we have only really looked into the sort of corporate welfare side and then the legislative side for advocates for animals. So yeah, unfortunately don't have an answer for that one, but again, it's something that is often comes up. We do have time in the year scheduled for our researchers to complete foundational research reports, and this question obviously comes up. Obviously a lot of organizations work on this kind of plant-based advocacy from either an institutional arena or like within schools or just individual outreach. So it is something we're definitely interested in researching, but it's not come up in any of the topics that we did in our pilot program in the last year.
Okay, so there are also questions for you about how is it possible to work with you. Some also ask what it's like for an organization to apply to work with you. Like, do you do those kind of collaborations? Can you tell about it?
Yeah, of course. So we've been really lucky for many organizations to get in touch, and we're offering two services, as I said now. So we've got the prioritization, which works through that thorough research process, and then we've got this consultation, which is more just kind of one-off information building, or some maybe a research task that you would like to us to carry out on your behalf. And the process there is just to get in touch. The easiest is probably via our website. We have an expression of interest form on there where you can detail what it is you would like, which service you feel like is maybe most suitable for that task. And then we get in touch. We have an introductory call and just make sure that we're putting you in the right area of our process, whether that's the full prioritization process or just a few questions on the consultation. And then we just start the process. We do a pre-collaboration survey for our monitoring, just to double check get us sort of download as much information as possible about what you're already considering, and then start that process there. So we've just partnered with another group. We're working with Sentience Politics currently on an ask until the end of October, and there's consultation going on all the time. We're working with the Aquatic Life Institute. So if organizations are interested, please stay either for the networking session after this, or get in touch with me via email, or just fill out that expression of interest form on our website, and we can go from there.
Great. Yeah, we really invite you to join us on the networking session soon, but there are still a few questions and we have a little bit of more time. Somebody asks, do you plan to, or have you attempted to analyze the effectiveness of animal ask itself? This is to say the difference in impact you produce for the organizations you advise.
Yeah, sure. So we always want to know, are we being useful? Is it a useful resource for the movement? Are we providing impact? And that's always been a real kind of foundational focus of our work. The first way, it's really challenging to do, of course, working with different organizations, and we're trying to measure the difference in the kind of decision making of that organization. So this is why we do the pre-collaboration survey. So we want to know, what asks are you currently thinking of? Is there anything that's already on your agenda? And then we do a post-collaboration where we want to know was the update, was it quite significant? So has the organization, because of our research, updated greatly towards a different ask that maybe they would never have thought of, or maybe they weren't really considering in any great detail? So this is kind of the main way we want to measure that impact, and is something that we're in the progress of doing with both Synergia and Advocates for Animals. And then also we feel like it's really important to measure generally, how are we coming across? Is it all clear? Does it make sense what we're offering? How likely are organizations to work with us in the future if they've just seen maybe a presentation or a video on our work? And so we did this year through a stakeholder evaluation, all of which is the results of which are on our website. It was really promising to know that organizations agreed, this kind of service was neglected. They were excited about our organization existing. Many who were asked, would you work with us in the future? It was either yes, or we would recommend your services to an organization where it might be more appropriate for you to work with them. So that was really promising. So yeah, whilst it's challenging as a more sort of meta organization, it's something that we really want to and do focus a lot of our time and effort on, to just ensure that every penny we're spending is as impactful as possible for the animals.
Great. There is also a question. Why did you decide to quantify expert opinions instead of leaving them as qualitative data?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the option is there for either. So sometimes the experts aren't as comfortable ranking the asks, so they just offer their opinion, and then we try to kind of numerically rank those. To be honest, in terms of our process, we're just trying to get as great a sort of grasp on all of the expert opinions out there that exist, and the best way for us to do that within the process that we use is to try and really quantify those. And we find that to be incredibly useful, particularly when we then rank alongside the cost effectiveness analysis and the weighted factor model, because then we end up with a number, which I know not everyone is that comfortable working within, sort of quantifying asks in numerical format. So yeah, I guess for our process, that's the easiest way to work through it. However, I would say I still feel like within the discussions, when we go from round 1 to round 2, our staff obviously have a discussion around each of the asks, and at that point, I think it's really integral to bring up any other kind of comments from the experts that were made, or if there's an expert that feels incredibly strongly about something, then we can add that to the information that we share between the rounds. So whilst it might seem like a relatively kind of strict numerical quantifying of the asks, there is leeway, and we do have many discussions to support those asks as well. It's just most useful for the framework to be able to quantify them numerically.
Great. So now I will ask the last question, and we can move on to the networking session, which everyone here is obviously invited to. So if you want to join us and talk with Amy a little bit more, then please click soon the link that will appear in the chat. So the last question is how long the ask prioritization process took with these organizations that you worked with?
Yeah, great question. So with Synergia and Amal, we worked with them for around 4 months full-time, the team. And this was an ask for 2 countries. So that kind of extended everything. So we needed to do scoping for both countries. We needed to assess all of the asks that were making it through to the rounds across both countries. And at that point, we had 3 full-time members of staff. And then with Advocates for Animals, it was definitely shorter, probably more like 3 months in total. They were much more specific in terms of what they wanted us to look into. And so and just for 1 country. So that took slightly shorter amount of time there. So it kind of fluctuates. And I think it depends largely on the scope, largely on our staffing. As I mentioned there, we got the ACE movement building grant, and that was for another staff member. So by the end of September, sort of October time, we'll be up to 4 full-time members of staff, which means all of the processes can be much shorter, which means we can work with more organizations. And also, if that feels kind of daunting, that you need some advice on a relatively quick decision and you don't have time to go through the full prioritization process, that's really why we came up with this consultation side as well. Again, that's a free service, and that's for organizations who just might need some templates or a framework or just pointing in the right direction. If you're looking at, one ask or another, maybe we've got something that we can pull from a previous project we worked on to try and assist. So yeah, I guess don't let that kind of put you off collaborating with us. But yeah, we want it to be as thorough as possible. So it tends to be a rather extensive process for that prioritization.
Okay, so yeah, this is the time that we move on to the networking session. So thank you very much, Amy, for this inspiring lecture and also for all the answers to the questions.
Sure.
I think that it will be great to see everyone attending the networking session too. So thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone attending. See you soon in the networking space. Just click the link that will appear in the chat. So thank you.